Well, I certainly appreciate everybody being here this morning for our presentation, and want to thank Bob and Monsi for giving me the opportunity to be on the program. I did adjust the title, as Monsi explained at the beginning there. I'm going to talk mostly about applied research. And I've had a lot of questions in the hallway about what the direction my talk is going to be. If I'm going to get up here and talk about what the dire strait of funding for universities, that's not what I'm going to do. Mostly because most of you that aren't in university systems don't care. And the other part of it is that it's really kind of a boring area to talk about what's really happening in terms of funding, and a lot of us don't have a lot that we can do on a short-term basis to turn around some of the direction that we've gone in universities with where that funding has gone. So I'm not going to talk about that. The main reason that I want to be here, though, is to talk about that I think we are at a crossroads of where we are in terms of applied research in the world, in particular in North America. I do think that research, applied research in particular, is alive and well. We've got more research and better quality research being done today than ever in history. And we should be very proud of that. However, I think we are in danger of turning back in time if we don't take care of a few things, and that's what I want to visit about. Why I think we're at a critical juncture is we've got fewer university swine research programs that are certainly out there, and that number is declining every day. We have fewer young people with farm backgrounds entering universities. It's more and more difficult to find people that want to go into particularly an applied background, applied research setting. Also, about the only two slides I'm going to have that really talk about the decreasing dollars is right here, talking about public research dollars for applied research are declining. The fortunate part is that our allied industry and other partners have brought a lot of those dollars up and sustained us in terms of the applied research side, not only in the swine industry, but research as a whole. And this is all federal and all U.S. Research and development funding. This is funds that are charts that are put together by the U.S. government, but it shows that federal funding, down there in the blue bars, federal funding really hasn't changed much since back all the way to about 1965. But you look at those yellow bars, industry research and development, and what's really happened, not only in the swine industry, but in all research and development across the United States. The industry has taken up the leadership and the funding role and brought the dollars in so that we can see that linear increase in all funding going towards research and development over time. So research is alive and well. However, I really believe that our current excitement of applied research breakthroughs in facilities, built-in production systems will wane with time and attrition over time due to our long-term inability to replace the current research leaders in the universities and in those production systems. That's my really main message, is that we have to make sure that we have a platform and a method in place to build a platform to train the next generation of researchers. We believe that one of those key answers is to continually supply those qualified young researchers, is to develop more public-private partnerships. I'm going to talk about a few of those today in order to maintain the critical research elements of research integrity, the peer review, and the student training that we lose when we go to totally private research. Before I walk into some of those background and that discussion, I do want to talk just a little bit about where are these applied research sites at. When you start putting together the number of research sites that are at U.S. universities, the list is still relatively long. There's about 28 universities, again, I've got listed up here, including USDA marks research settings, where you can go into any one of these universities and actually find pigs there. Now, how many of them are actually doing applied research? Well, I'd contend there's about 8 of them on this list that are doing applied swine research. Used to be every one of them on that list was. Okay? What's replaced that, though, is a variety of applied research settings out in commercial production facilities. And I know there's more than I probably have listed up here, but I've got about 14 of the different ones that I'm aware of that have research sites built within their production systems. And I did do these somewhat in chronological order from when they were first built to the current state. Over here on the farther right-hand corner for you, the ones that are either currently being built or just being finished. And certainly there's several feed companies that also have applied research sites within their operations. But as you go up into the upper corner of that slide, you see that two first ones up there, Holden Farms and Swine Graphics. I think it's quite appropriate to be talking about applied research at the Leman conference, since Al Leman had such an important role in starting and helping build the research settings within those two organizations, and were some of the leaders in putting applied research into practice out in the field. Before I talk about what I think we need to do to try to build on our public-private relationships, I want to give two examples of the importance of applied research and importance of adopting of technology. You really don't need to do that very much in this audience, but I do want to give this as a framework. The first example I'm going to give is from the corn industry. The second one is from within the swine industry. And the corn industry, this is a slide that I borrow from Ted Schroeder, one of our ag economists at Kansas State, that I think explains very nicely what has happened over time with the yields when we compare a very high yielding area in Europe, in Italy, a very good corn growing area, as compared to what's happened with yields in Iowa. And if you look back in the early mid-90s, the yields in Italy were greater than the yields in Iowa. However, as you look forward and moving out in time up to the present day, the yields in Italy really haven't moved at all. They've stayed flat through the last 15 to 20 years. Versus all of us know that the yields in Iowa have continued on this upward climb. What Dr. Schroeder would contend is this genetic enhancement, this genetic modified grains that we've been able to adopt, the agricultural practices that we've brought about have increased that advantage from anywhere from 40, 60 to 80% advantage over what's happened in Italy, or if we wouldn't have adopted those technologies, where we would be today in terms of our production of corn in the United States. And an example in the swine side that I think the North Carolina State study, they looked at two aspects, improvements in genetics and improvements in feeding programs. And here's just kind of the extreme, but what they did was they took the 1980 genetics, they had an unselected sow line, and then they had their selected genetic line, and then they fed them either 1980s feeding programs or 2005 feeding programs. So they did a 2x2 factorial. And like I said, this slide is one I got from Todd C., one of the leaders of this research project. I asked him for some slides that I could show some fun pictures of what these pigs look like. He said, well, this is kind of the extreme of how fat the 1980 pig was versus some of the extremes in terms of back fat on the 2005. However, if you put all that data together, it really does show a very nice picture of what's happened with the improvements that we've made in research over this 15-year time frame. First off, there was a 13% reduction in days to market between the 1980s and 2005 programs. About half of it was due to genetics, and about half of it was due to the changes in the feeding program and what we learned on the nutrition side. For feed efficiency, about 7% was due to the genetics, 20% of the advantage was due to the feeding program. The back fat reduction was entirely from the genetic improvement. The loin area was about 20% from the genetics, about 13% from the feeding program. And when you put some of the carcass traits and the feed efficiency together into a lean efficiency, how much lean do we get back for putting a pound of feed into these pigs? We see that about half of it was from the genetics, a half from the feeding program, but about a 45% improvement over this 15-year time frame. Again, just points to the importance of adopting technology over time. And to put these into some fun terms, I started calculating out how many tons of feed this would be in the United States, how many pig spaces. It would be about 12 million tons more feed we would have to feed today if we were feeding 1980s pigs with 1980s feeding programs. That's about 278 million bushels of corn more that we'd have to use. And any of you know that how short we are in corn supply right now in the United States. It would be pretty difficult to make that happen if we hadn't made these advancements. The growth side, we'd have to increase the number of barns we have in our industry by about 10% and have about 5 million more pig spaces than we currently have. So certainly adopting technology and doing research in order to move our industry forward, we've made tremendous progress over the years. My worry is that we want to keep up that same level of pace as we move into the future. In order for me to prepare for this talk, I did a lot of digging around online and try to find some information that might help explain what went wrong in some countries that lost their leadership edge in research and what we can learn from them and move forward in the U.S. in particular. And what I found was this is a very interesting presentation that Lever did in early 2010 to the Parliament in the UK. And what he describes is very typical of what we've had in the U.S. for long term. And if you look at our funding out of Washington, the model that they've used, and Lever termed this a pharmaceutical model, where the innovations are thought to occur at the basic science research level, and then you just funnel those innovations down through applied research and extension into practice. A one-way flow of information with all the innovation happening at the top. Well, any of us that are involved in agricultural research know that this isn't the way it works. Is that you have innovations occurring at all different levels of this chain. And I think Lever explained this very well, is that you have, it's not necessarily in this linear fashion, and that the actions happen at any other level can feed up and down this chain to help increase our knowledge and increase the innovation that happens. Probably one of the examples I'd use for how this model worked very well to bring a product to market and make it work very successfully for the industry was the example of Paline or ractopamine. When ractopamine was researched at that basic science research level, the belief was that we needed to feed 18 grams per ton, or 20 parts per million, for 8 weeks before market. When that product started working its way through the applied research and demonstration side, the message came back loud and clear, whoa, that doesn't work. It's too long a feeding period, it's too high a dose, but by doing the research at the demonstration level and the applied side, it fed back up to the company to tell we need to shorten this time up, and we ended up with a product that's been extremely successful not only for the company, but for producers and for the industry as a whole. What can happen, though, if we don't have this countercurrent flow of exchange is what really has happened in the UK. The UK removed these experiment stations, it removed the extension system, the way of that knowledge was transferred from the basic science level down to practice, and you end up with this void of this innovation vacuum where the information doesn't flow both ways, and eventually the industry doesn't profit from the innovations that are being made at the basic research level. And you end up exporting not only the thought leaders and the knowledge leaders from that industry were exported to other places around the world, and we've benefited from many of them, but it's also exported their industry out of the UK. I think Stuart Lum summarized this very nicely in a Pork Magazine article where he said, we can't turn the clock back, but we can learn from history and how a country's swine industry has evolved, or as we should say, devolved, and learned by others' mistakes. The United Kingdom is one such country as its swine industry has changed dramatically. 50 years ago, there were many UK-run extension station farms and a countrywide extension service. This helped pig farmers stay up to date and run efficient businesses. However, the Thatcher government ended those efforts, and money was funneled from applied research. This was at the UK pig farmers' detriment. I think we're in a much better situation than what we were in the UK when money was funneled away from applied research, because we have a much better infrastructure already set up out in a lot of our systems to take on that leadership role for applied research. The problem is, I think we want to make sure we don't forget about some of the benefits that come from a university applied research program when we put together some of our applied systems. And so that's what I want to do in the next few minutes, is just talk about and contrast the benefits and the downsides of university versus private versus public-private partnerships as what I think are the three main applied research models that we have right now today in North America. First off, just a couple pictures to show you what university research models look like. Everybody that has one of these systems, there are a lot of different varieties of shapes and sizes. The general consensus, though, is they're relatively small, very clean, few pigs per pen, very nice facilities. Big wide alleys, downtime, 2 weeks, 3 weeks downtime between pig groups. A lot of things that don't happen in the commercial world. This is just an example of one of our newer finishers. Same type of thing, very clean facilities, the robotic feeding systems, feed all kinds of different diets, but generally smaller pens, fewer pigs per pen than what we see in the private systems. But there certainly are some benefits to these university research systems. In the past, there's been really relatively low cost to the industry. The industry, other than paying your tax dollars, has not put a lot of dollars directly into university systems. The government's funded it. And so it's been basically a low-cost, almost free system for industry in the past. The data is generally less biased than private data. The researcher does not have to have an immediate short-term application. Thus, the research can be more long-term, more exploratory in nature, and focus on basic knowledge development. There's also, because you work at a university, you have all these students coming through, there's a continual infusion of very young, bright, inquisitive minds bringing new ideas to the group. Any of us in the audience that work at a university know that's one of the biggest perks. One of the biggest benefits of being at a university is all the young people that come in with new ideas, new thoughts, and challenge your conventional wisdom and help you to get yourself out of the rut of the way you've always thought about things and present you with a new way of new ideas to look at. Certainly there are downsides. Certainly when I showed you those pictures, I alluded to that first one, is the data can often not be relevant or easily applicable to others. Because we've all heard it, any of us that are involved in universities, is the research is done in outdated facilities, too few of animals, the wrong genetics, the wrong health status. We can't apply it to our system because it's not done with the kind of pigs that we have in the field. Also, universities move at a much slower pace. That's due to a few different reasons. It's due sometimes to regulatory requirements. Our IACUC committees, the time that it takes to get protocols approved, all those things slow us down. There's also other pressures on researchers' times, and I know that researchers in the private industry are also very, very busy people, but a lot of times you get pulled into teaching more and more classes, get pulled into committee meetings, all these things that take away time from focusing on the research side. Or the third one is, one of the byproducts of a tenure system, sometimes they simply don't have to. And so you're in university, there's sometimes a tenure professor doesn't have pressures unless they put the pressures on them themselves to be active and involved in research. Also, there's going to be less university-only applied research programs available in the future. That is one of the downsides. We're not going to have as many applied research programs out there. I showed you that I think we're already seeing a great decline, and I know that it's very difficult for some of the people that are in those, even those 8 remaining ones that I talked about, to keep that applied research basis because the administrators continually push you harder and harder to go after the dollars that are bigger in the basic research side. And just to give you, as I switch over into the private research models, there's a lot of different pictures I could have thrown up here of some of the facilities that people have built. Very nice facilities. These are 2 1,200-head finishing research barns we have with one of our producers there in Kansas. Show the feed logic feeding system in this example of how we feed the pigs for each individual pen in those facilities. Here's just another barn that just shows these are done, again, built very similar to the barns that they would have in their production system. One of the only innovations is you have to feed those pigs a different way than what they would in the normal barn in order to collect the feed data. Otherwise, it's a copycat barn to what they would have for the rest of their system, and they fill them with the same pigs, so the data is conducted on the same type of pigs that they have in the rest of their farm. And so the benefits of that is you can get rapid application. I did the trial in my barn, I got the results, I can apply it tomorrow. It's relevant to the exact production system where the research is conducted. You don't have to worry about how it translates into your pigs because it was done on your pigs. It can be focused on the immediate situation. Again, it can be bottom line driven. It can be focused on what's going to give us the biggest return today. The downsides of private research models, though, is that they can lose creativity over time unless new people are infused into that group. The bottom line immediate focus can stifle creativity and lead to fewer major breakthroughs. If we're always focused on what's going to give us the most return right now, it may not lose some of the focus on what may take us further 5 years down the road from now. And it may create a void of people to replace the current generation of researchers trained in applied research that can bridge that gap between basic research and practice. And that's my biggest concern. Another thing that happens with private research models is, generally, if we aren't sharing the information, we have a lack of peer review. And I think peer review is one of those areas that any of you that have went all the way through peer review in terms of data publication and papers, it's a very frustrating process and a very tedious, time-consuming process. But it's also a very important process because it makes our research better. You don't have to go through the publication side, though, to get some peer review. That peer review can come from sharing at meetings like here at the Leman conference. I know every time I've given a presentation, I hear the good and I hear the bad afterwards, what people think that I could have done differently. One trial I talked about in my presentation, did you guys think about doing it a little bit differently here? Did you notice that when you took those pigs off weight, what happened to them after that? Well, we didn't measure that. Well, you should do that next time because we saw something different. And so you got to get that feedback that you get from sharing your information. Sharing at, whether it be Leman Conference, AESV, or animal science meetings, or if you don't want to share at those meetings, even local or regional meetings between production systems, so you can get feedback from your peers within other production systems. It provides a forum to discuss and debate the research findings, and it does provide the opportunity for alternative conclusions to surface and allows for improvements for your future experiments. One of the biggest reasons people don't want to share information is that they believe that the confidentiality gives them a competitive advantage. That's why they're doing the research in their farm, is what they'd contend. And that outweighs the feedback that they get from any new ideas or sharing of the data. Fortunately, we work with a lot of people that believe that the feedback and the new ideas that they get greatly outweighs what they give up by giving up some confidentiality on some of their experiments. I just want to take a step out of the swine industry to talk about what's happening in another area. This is what's happening in the human medical side with Alzheimer's disease research. This is a very interesting system that these researchers got together, put together a program where they would share all of their information on a real-time immediate basis in terms of looking at biomarkers for Alzheimer's disease. I've got a couple quotes underlined in here. One of them said researchers decided to share all data, making every single finding public immediately, available to anyone with a computer anywhere in the world. You can log in and pull down the biomarker research data anytime you want off of this site. The researcher at the bottom is a researcher at the University of Pennsylvania. His quote was, "All of us parked our egos and intellectual property noses outside the door and agreed that all of our data would be public immediately." One of the things that's already came from this, besides some of the breakthroughs that they're starting to make, is that a follow-up happened, is that the drug makers will share data from failed Alzheimer's trials. This came out after that. Everybody was doing trials and nobody was being very successful, very frustrated with the results. But all these drug makers, all the pharmaceutical companies decided to get together, share their information so they could learn from each other on what these failures were, so they didn't have to repeat each other's failures. I think it's a nice example of where giving up a little bit of confidentiality, hopefully, will lead to a much faster breakthroughs on a very frustrating disease in terms of Alzheimer's. We do have some good examples that in the swine industry, like the PRRS cap, I think, in some of the discussion that was talked about yesterday about the sharing of information and how that's moved us forward so quickly in terms of the PRRS area. And I think that's a good example of where we can help by taking down that level of confidentiality and moving our industry forward. Why I think confidentiality is such a big problem for us in private research models is that it leads to selective publication of data, is one of the big problems. Any of us that are involved in research have had somebody come to you with this requirement. We'll fund the project, but we reserve the right to decide whether the data will be published. So what does that mean? It means that the data will only be published if it's positive. Okay? Just take you through a little scenario of what can happen if you follow that bend. This is an example, and pretend you're a producer out there, and those producers in the audience, you got somebody coming into your office with a new feed additive. They've got a data set that they bring to show you. It says this feed additive is showing this trial. It improved average daily gain by 25% by putting this in your diet. It only costs about $3 a ton to add it, and so it's a no-brainer, high payback. Well, you've had people in your office before, and so you say, well, do you have any other data? And say, well, good question. I do. I've got several other experiments that I'm able to share with you. So, wow, they've done 11 experiments. But they're all positive. Every experiment's showing a return. And no, it's not all 25%, but it still averages 5%. We'll still pay back your investment of that $3 per ton pretty easily. And you look at it pretty hard and say, well, maybe we should put a place in our research barn to test this feed additive to see whether we can get the response to it. But then you remembered, you said, I've got this other data that I can share with you. Does he have any data that he can't share with me? And so you start digging around and you talk to your friends in other companies and you find out, yes, there's a bunch of other experiments. I'll go back from this, that there's about 11 more experiments out there, but they're all negative. So all of a sudden, you put all these numbers together. Was that average response 5% from those first 11 experiments? Was it 3%, which is the average of experiment 2 through 11? Or even with the 25%, you put them all together, was it 0.8%? This is what happens every day. People do trials, and you're going to have wins, you're going to have losses. The best products in the world have losses. You got to share that information. People will be much more open. I have a great deal of respect for companies that are willing to share the information with me and show that their product doesn't work every single time, because we expect there to be some failures in experiments. If there weren't failures, we know that with statistical process there has to be failures in some experiments. Okay. So lowering the bar on confidentiality, I believe, will be required if the North American swine industry is to continue the pace of technological improvement that we've experienced in the past. And I do want to commend several of our systems that have taken this step to share some of their research. And I do emphasize some, because I don't think we have anybody that's sharing all of their information yet. But the ones I've got listed up here, and I could list several others, but Mashoff's, Hanor, New Horizon Farms, New Fashion Pork, and several others. And there's several feed companies, JBS United, Hubbard Feeds. There's several others that share a lot of their information at our animal science meetings or at vet meetings, allow the, graduate students to work with them on getting information out. But I believe that more sharing is needed. So I'm going to shift gears and talk about a new model that I see developing in the U.S. that I'm hoping takes place in more of our private systems. And that's called public-private research models, where we're putting the best of both worlds together. Also, the worst of both worlds sometimes has to come together in this model, but we do get the best that comes in together. And that's shown here as the benefits. You get the relevance of data, because you can do the trials in the large systems just like you do in the private models. You get large system application. You get the creativity and the peer review that the university brings to the table, or from the public side. You also get to have the ability to add areas and depth of expertise that cannot be afforded sometimes within the production system. What I mean by that is that if we have a particular project that we need to bring a meat scientist involved, at the university they're right down the hall. If you want to bring an animal behaviorist involved, we've got one of those on staff too. You want to bring in different partners, we can make those connections very quickly, very fast. Yeah, you can do that in a private system, but it takes a little more time to try to make the right connections, figure out who the right people are to bring onto the team. So we can add those areas and depth of expertise relatively easily. Plus, it provides the opportunity to train the young professionals that, in some of these systems, become the next people that take over the research in those private systems. And the two models that I wanted to give credit to, the Mashoff model with University of Illinois, I think is a tremendous model that a lot of us can mimic and follow what they've done. They've put together a very nice relationship with the University of Illinois to train graduate students. And if any of you get into the Mashoff's office and you start talking to those people, a lot of those students that came through that program are now employees of Mashoff. They get to cherry pick the best because they have involved with doing research with them on a daily basis. I also want to certainly credit New Horizon Farms for the relationship that we've had with them for a number of years, and the number of our students that have received their master's or PhD programs done almost entirely off of data that was conducted at New Horizon Farms. A good example of that, Roger Main, when Roger finished his PhD with us, a big chunk of Roger's data was conducted at New Horizon Farms. Certainly there can be downsides. The downsides for the production system is that you certainly have to recognize the commitment to research in the added labor, the equipment, and the potential impact on pig flow and productivity by doing some of these research trials the way some of us in the university system want to make you do them. And also you have to give up some levels of confidentiality. That has to come if you're going to have graduate students that are going to publish some data. Certainly, though, there's also some downsides for the university. Because university people, we have to recognize the commitment to resources that the production system has put in place and not apply treatments that are overly disruptive to the production process. There's also other areas that can be viewed as a pro or a con. The decisions must be made on a team basis rather than an individual basis. Certainly, we view that as a pro, because we see the team decision-making process as a major benefit, getting more people's ideas together in that decision-making process. However, some researchers, and I would certainly classify some university administrators, view this as a big downside. The downside for some of them is that it's difficult for them to determine who to give credit to. That's one of the most frustrating parts about being involved in a team, is when you get an administrator that doesn't understand team concept and just can't understand how do we count publications when you got all of you listed on a publication. Who gets credit for it? So we don't care. The industry doesn't care who gets credit for doing the research. All they care about is what impact that research is going to have. But that is a problem that we have in university systems with getting credit. This is probably, I think, my most important slide of the day, and I got to credit Steve Dreetz in our group for most of the information that's on this slide. Our belief is that much of the value of an internal production research program lies in the ability to execute change based on the data. Our observation is that production systems with excellent processes in place to execute change also have greater confidence to submit their internal research data to external review. Their belief is that the major technological advantage is from adoption. So it's not from having the data, it's from them being able to adopt the data, being able to execute the change within their system faster and better than others. And because of that, a model of being exposed to more outside ideas, so sharing some of their information, brings more opportunities for them to implement, more opportunities that they get back from the others that they share it with. So I think that's a very important message as we talk through this, is the reason that people would give up confidentiality is because they believe they get more back by sharing some of that data. What do I think the requirements? If you decide you're going to be involved in a research program that is going to stay in the private side, you're going to join up with somebody on the public side, or if you're at a university and working at a university system, there's 5 key components we think need to be involved in any research model. I'm going to go through each of these, but the creativity, the dollars, research mentality and commitment, peer review, and credibility. First one being creativity. I already talked about this a little bit, but you need a continual infusion of new ideas to make a research program work. Don't squash the ideas of the non-insiders. We have to be careful at a university because sometimes that's the graduate student, the newer student in the group. Sometimes it's a technician that brings a good idea to the group. In a production system, it may be the grower in the barn. It may be a service man that's out making calls on the growers that comes up with an idea. But if they're not part of the research team, sometimes those ideas get pushed down and aren't allowed to surface. We need to make sure we don't squash those ideas before they're fully heard out. You also must create time to be creative. And that's sometimes easier said than done. All of us are very busy people, always have lots of things on our plate. You can't decide what's the next trial you're going to do because you got a group of pigs coming available and we need to get feed to them tomorrow. You have to force time to make some of these, to have some brainstorming sessions. We do it a lot through forced meetings. Everybody's got enough meetings in the day, but we find that we have to force ourselves to get together, dedicate time to talk about the research in order to let those ideas surface. Professional meetings, such as coming to Leman conference, for us our animal science meetings, are absolutely essential to attend those meetings to get the feedback in the hallway, get the feedback in the meeting rooms on things that you need to test in your system. And certainly other people have other avenues, certainly providing time for you to read, follow in literature, other ways to be creative and come up with new ideas. Another way to be creative is adding people. People bring new ideas. Adding people to a group is one of the things that has been very frustrating in recent years, not only in the swine industry but in universities, is because of the downturn in the economy, it's been more difficult to add new faculty or new employees. However, you don't have to do it only by hiring. You can do it by partnering to add expertise and ideas to the team. Bring in other people, whether it be for a long-term partnership or just for a meeting for a few days, bring them into your group to allow new ideas to surface that you hadn't thought about testing before. The next point, the dollars. We certainly need dollars to conduct research because research and development is expensive. Partnering allows us to spread these costs and leverage the expertise and resources. However, research still costs money. Most important point, though, is don't let the quest for dollars drive the research. I think it's very dangerous to allow the research to become a profit center, especially in private research systems. If we allow the research to turn into a profit center, the focus changes very quickly from answering those most important questions to paying the bills and paying salary. And the research then becomes driven by whoever brings the most dollars to the table. If you're a veterinarian running one of these systems, it's the animal health company. As a nutritionist, it's an ingredient supplier that brings the most dollars to the table. And so all of a sudden, your research is all looking at their biggest question, not the biggest question on the production end of the producer that you're working with. Sometimes they can mesh, and you hope they do. But sometimes we find ourselves that they don't mesh, and we're chasing the dollar end. What happens when you start chasing the dollars to pay salaries and keep the lights on is that you compromise on experimental design and interpretation many times to satisfy the sponsor. Bottom line is you need dollars to run a research program, but don't let the dollars drive your research program. The third part of a research program is the research mentality and commitment. And I've got this broke down into two different pieces. First one being, will the research get done according to protocol? What we find working with applied research programs, whether it be somebody at a research farm or whether it be out in the field working with a production system, is you have to have a champion with a research mentality in the upper management team, or this won't happen. Without a champion, the short-term costs, or the way we always do things, will win out over proper experimental design. Doesn't matter what the protocol says. We always market pigs in this date, and we always go through and mark the heaviest pigs in every pen. Those things destroy your research project very quickly, and if we allow the way we always do things to dictate it rather than proper experimental design. Second one then is, once we've agreed to that protocol and we're going to follow that, is rigor in actually carrying it out. We have rigor in protocol development, in experimental design, in execution, in data capture, in analysis, and in interpretation. Lack of discipline on the rigor side will lead to failure of repeatability of results and failure of that research to impact the production system. Examples I'd give of lack of rigor is allotting pigs to treatments without balancing for genetic lines, gender, source farm, or location in the barn. We know all these things impact performance. And so how do we know if our treatment had an impact in performance if we didn't control for all these variables? Weighing on scales that haven't been calibrated. It's time to weigh pigs. Everybody wants to rush at it and get it done, get out of the barn. And you find out later that the scales had never even been calibrated before we started the process. Not validating pig counts and documenting removals. We've had numerous trials where you get done and you try to match up the numbers and they don't equal. Somebody didn't account for pigs when they were removed from the pen. We don't know what day they were removed. We don't know when they were removed. It's just a failure of lack of rigor in the process. Not treating all pigs on test in the same manner. Not having sufficient replication to draw conclusions. Using the wrong statistical methods to analyze data. All these are just examples of where a lack of rigor can lead to lack of trust, which leads to eventually lack of need for the researchers. Okay. Talked about peer review a little bit earlier. Told you that was a very humbling and frustrating process, but I also believe it's absolutely critical to improve the process and gain new ideas from others to apply within your research, within your system, because it helps force rigor back into your process control. One of the things that the peer review process has done for us is it teaches you the caveats and the things to look for and the things you need to make sure you do right, because it simply becomes too embarrassing not to have rigor when you expose yourself to peer review. Any of us that have published peer review articles know we got data in publication that is wrong. We've all done it. We've all got trials out there that later you go back and go, man, how did we miss that one? But it made it all the way through the peer review process. But there's an awful lot of times that things get caught and things get improved. Make you go back and take a look at the data a little different way because some reviewer had a good idea that you never thought of in the process. And finally, credibility. Can your results be trusted by others? It is important to note, though, is you don't have to have credibility to attract funding. We all know that there's places that you can go if you want to find a positive response. That may be because of their lack of rigor in how they do the trials. I'm not saying they do it totally dishonest. What happens sometimes, it's a lack of rigor in experimental execution, but a lot of times it's that lack of open sharing of the data. We do the trial 3 times. 1 time it's positive, 1 time it's negative, the other time it's no response, and we only show the positive data. That's what happens sometimes. As university researchers, if research is not credible, producers will fail to gain benefit from our recommendations and will eventually lose their support. Within a production system, if the research program loses credibility, the system will eventually ignore the results and not implement them, leading to a lack of need for the research program. There are some systems that used to have research programs in place in their production systems that no longer do. I believe that part of the reason they don't is because of the lack of credibility within their own system for the results, because of lack of rigor in how the experiments were carried out. So what can we do? Well, as producers, support researchers that are doing applied work. You can do that either financially or, more importantly, politically. University administrators need some feedback. You need to let them know it's important that you have people at the university doing applied work, being involved and engaged with producers out in the field. If you build research facilities in your system, commit to doing the research correctly. And consider supporting graduate students and involving some graduate students to help train that next generation of researchers, because you may be the one that needs to hire one the next time around. Consider partnering with other systems to share data and information. Some of this may not be ready for a step of totally open sharing. I understand that. You put a lot of investment into the research dollars, but consider partnering with other systems that you trust to help get some peer review between your organizations. Or, another area, it's very difficult and expensive to build gestation facilities to do research. It's a critical need in our industry right now. There's very few of these facilities available anywhere in the U.S. And with most of this research is old. It's been done in universities a long time ago. Considering partnering with somebody to help reduce the cost on getting that gestation research done for your system. For researchers, what can you do? Consider building relationships with systems that already have research facilities to help them out and also help yourself out. Encourage your colleagues that have an interest in applied research. Involve your students in applied projects to help increase their value and their marketability, because doing some of these trials is the best indoctrination for some of our students on what things are like in a finishing barn. We have an increasing number of students that don't grow up on a farm, that don't have any pig background. Very, very good students, passionate about pigs, passionate about the swine industry. They just don't have experience in buildings. And so getting some of this experience of working in research barns is, for some of them, their first opportunity to really get involved and see what's happening out in the field, and that makes connections where they can then get out into other facilities. How about applied research sponsors? What you can do, first off, is make sure that certainly that your project is designed to answer the objectives that are laid out in the protocol. I'd encourage you to be more open with publishing more of your research results. As I mentioned, we work with some tremendous research sponsors that allow us to be very open with their data, and it builds tremendous respect for me, for their companies, that I can trust their information because of how open they are. Encourage private systems that you work with to partner with others to ensure that rigor is applied to the research process and to increase transparency in the process and the results. So by involving others in that process, it helps to force rigor into it, but it also exposes students that are involved in that process and other researchers to your products. It's a good way to open up and expand the number of people that are going to see your research results by expanding the number of people involved in the project. How about university administrators? I don't know how many administrators we have in the audience, probably not a lot of them, but for university administrators, we need to figure out ways to reward faculty that build relationships and have productive applied research records. The reality is you can do some very good applied research at a university on relatively few dollars, because fortunately for us in the university, the research partners we have in the field are funding a big chunk of that research because they have the pigs, they put the feed into them, they have the crews to weigh the pigs, all those things, so we can get that data relatively low cost. The trouble is, a lot of our administrators, it's all about counting the dollars. They need to figure out better ways of counting the impact rather than just counting how many dollars are coming in the door. So I really believe that one of the buzzwords in universities is that all of our universities want to be engaged universities, engaged with the people in your state. This is one area where the university administrators can help their university truly become an engaged university with the industry that these researchers are working with. As I finish up, I do want to thank a few people. First, I want to thank our early Kansas partners. These systems in Kansas allowed us to start doing applied research on their farms years and years and years ago. most of these, before I was starting grad school, trials were being done at Keysucker Agribusiness there in Kansas. Innovative leader that helped Dale Keysucker run this business, taught us an awful lot about opening up his facilities and doing trials in his farm. Eichmann Farms, if you look at these two on this list, most of the early breakthroughs that people gave Kansas State credit for in terms of nursery diets, how to feed young pigs, most of that work was done on those two farms. Henry's Limited, Kansas Swine Alliance, research relationships that we've had with those groups over time has helped us do an awful lot of sow research and grill finish research also. Then the applied research partners that I've learned an awful lot from over the last several years, Holden Farms, J6 Farms, New Horizon Farms, and Wakefield Pork, that are very open with sharing their information with me and helping me understand how some of these applied research systems work in their systems. Also, our Kansas State swine team, I work with a very talented group. I'm very lucky to be involved with the group of researchers and extension people that all have a bent towards working with the industry, all really want to focus on the applied side. Very happy to be with the team that I am at Kansas State. And I do want to thank, I talked about administrators, I want to thank our Kansas State administrators for allowing us to focus on applied research and taking some of the bullets that they have over time because of the applied research focus that we've had and not gone the same direction that some of their bosses sometimes think that we should take in terms of a focus at the university. So in summary, applied research, I believe, is alive and healthy. However, we believe the future is in danger with privatization. The leaders are getting older and will need to be replaced. As I went back to that early slide that showed who's got applied research facilities, many of these, the people running the research, conducting the research in those facilities, are getting up close to retirement age, and we need to replace that generation of researchers. We need to provide a place for training of that generation so we can replace them in these systems. The researchers in these public-private partnerships must remain an unbiased source of new creative ideas in order for us to make the progress that we have in the past. The research needs to be focused on the long-term priorities of the partnership and not be driven by outside funding sources focused on placement of product within the production system. Because fewer universities will be involved in applied research, those in these public-private partnerships, I think, will have the opportunity to be pretty well funded because there's not going to be very many of us left. To be successful long-term, these research models must have creativity, they do have to have the dollars, the research mentality, peer review, and credibility. And I do believe we have an increasing number of examples in our industry where this is occurring. And as an industry, we've got to learn from these and improve on these models to keep the North American swine industry in the leadership role as the research and production leader around the world. It's my goal to keep our industry at that forefront. We know that we get visitors from lots of countries every day that are learning from what we've done in the U.S. and going home and applying it in their industries and building research infrastructure in their industries. I don't want us to go the direction of what happened in the UK and have us export our leadership role in this area. With that, I thank you and be happy to entertain any questions.
So first question, how do you convince a company of the advantages of execution versus keeping the results confidential?
That's a good question, and sometimes we're successful, sometimes we're not. It certainly has to be the right projects. First off, you have to be careful not especially with a company that hasn't exchanged a lot of the information in the past. You've got to make sure that it's something and convince them that it is an area that will benefit for them to get information back from others by sharing that data, and usually something that they don't think is so near and dear to their heart. One of the areas that you don't want to ask somebody to share information usually is genetic trials. They're very resistant because of the difficulty and the cost that goes into running some of those experiments. But for most feeding trials or feed additive trials, and we do is try to be very open up front also, make sure we discuss that before the trial's done rather than trying to discuss it on the backside.
Very good. Why has KSU animal science program flourished so well, whereas most of the other programs have declined?
Well, I have to give a lot of credit on terms of where our K-State program has gone. First off is we do nutrition. I would not go to K-State if you want applied reproductive physiology, you want genetics, you want, we're building up a pretty good group in the vet school on the disease side, so I can't talk about animal health anymore. But for years, what our administrators allowed us to do was hire a lot of nutritionists and focus on one area. And so instead of trying to be all things to all people, they allowed us to really focus in, and they allowed us to hire some talented young people. And then the other thing you have to do sometimes when you're on the fringes, you have to beg, borrow, and steal. And we hired our last hire in our group, very, very talented. It doesn't get to a lot of these vet meetings, but Joel DeRushi, any of you had the opportunity to work with Joel, extremely talented young guy. We hired him into a beef position. There was a beef position because that was the position that was available. We figured out a way to get Joel into that position. Now he's a swine nutritionist.
Very good. With the Mashov University of Illinois training model, a graduate student costs about $35,000 a year. What's the return for a production company to do that?
Okay. Well, that's probably a question that would be best addressed to the Mashovs, and I've talked to Bradley Walters about that, and Bradley believes that that's such a key part of their future and their growth, of training some of these graduate students and exposing them to the kind of research that can be done in production systems, because even if they don't hire them, it allows them to go out and improve on the industry. But most importantly for Mashovs is you can look at the number of people that have come through that system and how many of them are now on staff with their group, and how it's helped lead them forward by hiring, like I said, the best and the brightest that they see coming through there that can help their system.
Yeah. Along the same lines, tuition debt, as you know, is big for the students once they graduate, and it's getting bigger. Would production companies share the tuition debt somehow to encourage students to go and stay in agriculture?
Yeah, that's a good question. In terms of tuition debt, fortunately on the graduate student side, our graduate students come in with some debt from undergrad usually. If they're at all frugal, they don't leave with any additional debt from graduate school, because we don't pay them extremely well, but we do pay them, and so they don't have to accumulate debt while they're in graduate school. But yes, ways of we do have some people that are providing dollars to our program that we use for graduate student funding to help coordinate research. A good example is New Horizon Farms. The relationship we have with them is that one of the things they do is provide some funding that funnels into training the student that is in charge of the research projects that coordinating the research that's going on at that site.
Very good. Within academia, you know that basic researchers tend to bring in more money, and are therefore more highly regarded, at least at the administration level. Yeah. Would you encourage a new PhD graduate student to pursue basic or applied research? Well,
certainly, the most important thing, I think, with any new student, and we talk about our graduate students when they come in the program, anybody that comes looking at our program, is you've got to know where your passion is. You don't want to pursue an area that you're not passionate about. And so if your passion is in the applied research side, I would heavily encourage them to go after that area. Because I've seen too many situations where they've tried to take a really good applied person and shoehorn them into a basic side, and that's not what they want to do. Now, if we have somebody that has the ability and the desires to go down the basic research side, we certainly encourage them to do that. We try to explain to them at K-State, it's probably not the best place for them to go if they want to be a basic researcher on the swine nutrition side. We help partner up and take with them with another university to help give them some of that training.
There was a request from the audience to show this slide again, but I don't see a question associated to that. So.
Yeah, well, I did explain that Todd C, when he shared this with me, he said that he didn't have he didn't have an average of each of these. He said, but this kind of shows the extremes, and those pictures in the bottom. But I really liked this experiment because it just showed the technological advances that came about from 15 years of genetic selection and 15 years of nutrition research.
Mike, we've talked before about a consolidation and poultry as well. And probably this is not a new challenge to the other industries. So how has poultry handled this same challenge?
Yeah, that's a very good question. And what's happened in the poultry side, I'm certainly not an expert in the area, but as I've seen where it's consolidated, there's fewer universities that are doing poultry research, and there's centers of focus. I mean, University of Arkansas is, if you're going to do amino acid research and a lot of other areas, but in particular amino acid area, they've got most of the leaders in the amino acid research in the poultry industry at their university. Then they have other centers, you have individuals at other universities that have expertise in particular areas, but that's what we've seen is that it's really consolidated that research effort into relatively few. And there's good that comes with that, but there's also a big narrowing down of the number of people with diverse ideas that can approach an area by doing that.
And Mike, and as you've looked at other models as well, have you looked at and see whether there is any other model on the research side and the partnerships anywhere in the world? I mean, that it's different and could be new for us in the U.S. that could even be delivering even better results.
Yeah, there's the research model. There's different ways that funding can go about it in terms of deciding what the priorities of the industry. The Australians have an interesting model where they have an overall oversight committee and a national organization that controls a lot of the research dollars that come from the federal level and from the checkoff level in terms of where that funding gets applied. Again, there's benefits that come with that because there's less duplication. They funnel the data to whoever they think is the most appropriate person to, the research dollars to who's the most appropriate person to answer a specific question. The downside of that is that it's hard to build somebody new into a leadership role because the dollars go to the same group that has had traditional history of doing good research in a particular area.
Okay, interesting. So, looking back at the swine industry and the research side, what is the largest area of opportunity that you see for the swine industry?
On research and applied research as a whole?
On applied research.
That's a good question. I mean, just in a general sense, I think the opportunities are I really am a strong believer in the trying to be more open and sharing with information and trying to, because I think the biggest opportunity is we've got some tremendous assets out there now in the industry and some tremendous researchers that are doing some very good work that a lot of us don't ever see. Some of us have the opportunity to see some of that information, but we need to figure out ways to make people more comfortable with sharing and trying to move the whole industry forward. So I think as a general sense, that's what I'd argue. Within individual areas, I mean, certainly reducing our feed inputs is continually going to be a big driver, whether that be on the genetic side or the innovations on the feed side. I think is one of our biggest drivers that we need to continue to focus on.
Very good. Tricky question. How do you remain unbiased if significant funding comes from the private vendors?
That's an excellent question, and we all have private funding that helps sustain our programs. It's something that you have to watch carefully and make sure that you have police each other within your team, and we try to do that somewhat of looking at research results and having, if one of us has a relationship in terms of working with a company on a research project, having one of our people in our group that doesn't have as close a relationship to review those reports and those papers and make sure that you don't let the bias enter in, because you do build up biases even when you don't try to over time with particular companies, just because you like the people that you're working with, you get to know them well, and it's very difficult to keep that out. So having a peer review process and keeping yourself in peer review through the publications, forcing yourself to publish, takes out a lot of that because that gets caught by the reviewers usually in a review process.
No, one last question. Universities have more graduate students from the outside the U.S. who may or may not, some may stay, but many of them go back to their home countries after graduation. Is this hurting the U.S. in the long term?
That's a good question. We do have, we've got a number of international students that are also part of our research program. We think they provide an important piece of our program to expose our students in the U.S. to other people's ideas and to other ways of raising livestock around the world. So we think that having that connection is extremely vital. I think we have to be careful that we open ourselves up and we don't just take the easy route of, I mean, for a lot of times, international students come with funding, you don't have to pay them sometimes to provide stipends. We have to be careful at university that doesn't become your only source of students because we won't be able to train the number of people we need to replace in our industry. And so we try to maintain a balance on that, but it is something that you have to watch.
Okay, very good. Well, with that, I don't think we have any other questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Don't go.
Oh,
This is, as I mentioned before, this is the Pigeon Lecture, and certainly it's an honor to me, for me to present you with this award. No, Carlos was a defendant of research and certainly applied research, and I know he would be very proud of you, your work, and KSU. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Monsi. It's quite an honor. Oh, thank you.